All right, everybody. So today's lesson for January 11th, Thursday, is going to be on writing and graphing inequalities, but it's going to be broken up into three different parts. So this is part one of three. The topic/objective, like it says, you can just write here inequalities. Make sure that you have your name on it in case it gets lost. I can make sure to give it back to you for your notebook check. And then the essential question for today is, how can you use a number line to represent solutions of an inequality? How can you use a number line to represent solutions of an inequality? And so if you watch the introduction video, as you should have before watching this video, if you haven't, please go back and make sure you watch that. You'll see how I use a number line to represent the solutions to the inequality that was given. I have an extra S here. Let me erase that. Oops. Represent solutions of an inequality. So, like I said, inequality is going to be different than an expression or than an equation. So, one of the questions that we could write here is, how is an inequality different from an equation or an expression? So there's a question for you to think about on your own. What do we know about expressions? Well, we know expressions are different from equations because an expression doesn't have an equal sign, whereas an equation does have an equal sign. But now we need to understand what makes an inequality different from those two. And so I will go ahead and give you an answer here for this question that we just asked. And you can write down that an inequality uses symbols such as greater than, less than, and then two new symbols that you're going to learn are less than or equal to and greater than or equal to. So you can hear me say equal, so that little line underneath that less than and the greater than sign, those actually represent an equal sign. And so these are different. For example, these two are different from each other because the first one is something is greater than something else, whereas the second one is something is greater than or it's equal to something else. And that'll make a little more sense as we go on through this lesson. So let's go ahead and start off with vocabulary. An inequality, we can define an inequality as a math sentence that compares expressions. It contains symbols, and the symbols are greater than or equal to, or greater than or equal to. And so these symbols are giving us pieces of information, such as the symbol that we used on the introduction video. We used a greater than or equal to symbol in order to represent that the number of people that visited the food truck was greater than or equal to 53. So these symbols are going to be kind of like words that we use, but instead of writing it out, we can just use a symbol to represent it, make it a lot easier. So some of the key phrases that you're going to have to keep an eye out for, this is where, like I said last semester, we're going to start getting into a lot more word problems. And so inequalities basically are all going to be word problems because we're going to be keeping an eye out for keywords that are going to tell us what kind of symbols we're going to use. And so here you can see that if we're going to use a less than symbol, they're going to keep an eye out for words that are key phrases such as is less than or is fewer than. Fewer and less are synonyms of one another. And then same thing with greater than, we're going to keep an eye out for the word greater than, or maybe something is being described as more than. More and greater, also synonyms of one another. Now, the really important ones that people tend to forget about are the equal sign ones, the ones that include greater than or less than and equal to. And so some phrases you might be keeping an eye out are is less than or equal to, is at most, is no more than. If I tell you that at most the fastest that I can run a mile is 16 minutes, which is really slow. But, I mean, that probably is how fast I can run a mile. Is at most 16 minutes. That means that my time is going to be at most, the max time that I'll be able to get, the fastest time that I'll be able to get is 16 minutes. And anything less than that is also a valid answer. So that'll make more sense as we go on. And then also keep an eye out for things like at least or no less than, words that we heard in the introduction video. So it will be handy for you to make sure that you keep this in a safe place. I would actually also recommend that if you can make yourself this little chart on a separate piece of paper, that would be helpful for you to just refer back to. So if you get confused on what kind of symbol you need to use, you can look back at the key phrases that you're going to be seeing. So let's go ahead and try an example together. Now, if you're a little lost and you kind of want to go back and just rewatch that part of the video, I would definitely recommend that you do. That's one of the nice things about this Google Classroom setting and the self-paced setting is that you're going to be able to rewatch videos however you'd like, as many times as you'd like for it to make sense. And you can also refer back to the introduction video now that we've kind of talked a little bit more about inequalities and see if that also makes a little more sense with what you just learned. But let's go ahead and do an example together. I'm going to scroll down here to example 1. And example 1 reads, write this word sentence as is an inequality. A number q plus 5 is greater than or equal to negative 7.9. Write this word sentence as an inequality. So let's highlight some important information here. You can underline, circle, square, but I'm going to highlight the stuff that I see as important. So I've got that a number q plus 5, that's a piece of information right there. The number is q plus 5. And then there's one of our key phrases, is greater than or equal to, and then the last piece of information, negative 7.9. I'm going to use a different color than that actually. Let's use yellow. Negative 7.9. So as you can see, I've got 3 pieces of information here. I have number q plus 5 is greater than or equal to, and negative 7.9. So what I'm going to write here for my keywords are number q plus 5. How does that look like if we were to put it in its mathematical form? Number q plus 5. That's going to look like q plus 5. So that's one of the 2 sides of our inequalities that we're going to be comparing. And then is greater than or equal to is greater than or equal to, and you should be following along with this, writing this down as well, is greater than or equal to, well, that, I know what greater than looks like. Greater than looks like this, where if I were reading from left to right, I would say that x is greater than y, where the other sign would be read as x is less than y. So I know that my greater than symbol looks like this little alligator being pointed to the left. However, it also says it's also equal to, so it can be greater than or equal to. So I'm going to also include a little bar underneath it that represents that it's greater than or equal to. And here I'll highlight the parts that this is talking about. So the greater than is referring to this little guy right there, as where the equal to is referring to this bottom part here, but they're mixed together. And then the last important piece of information is the negative 7.9. And negative 7.9 is just going to be represented as negative 7.9, but now we have to put it all together. So I have both sides of my inequality, just like I have 2 sides to an equation, I also have 2 sides to an inequality, which is going to be either 2 expressions or maybe 2 numbers, but definitely you're always going to have some sort of variable inside an inequality. And my variable here, my letter that I'm going to be using to represent any sort of number is going to be q. So now I'm going to put q on one side of the inequality. I'm going to put q plus 5, and then I'm going to put on the other side, the other part of my information, which is negative 7.9. And then now with the inequality, I have to choose what goes in the middle. And I know it's not going to be just in equal signs because that would make it and you should be thinking equation. So what I am going to do, though, is I'm going to use this greater than or equal to sign to put it here in the middle. And now I've written out my inequality, the same math sentence up here, but now I've written it out in math terms. So the inequality, this would be read as q plus 5 is greater than or equal to negative 7.9. And so that is my inequality there. And now we are going to get to the point where we're going to be graphing solutions for this inequality, so I can actually figure out what does Q have to be for this to be true. So let's go ahead and write that here in our questions. What numbers do Q have to represent for the inequality to be true? What numbers do Q have to represent for the inequality to be true? I'm going to curve my Q's a little bit just so that you guys don't confuse them as 9s. Because if we were to put in, let's say, a number such as Q is equal to 1, and this is just an example, if Q is equal to 1, then, and I plug that into here, that would be 1 plus 5. 1 plus 5 would give me 6. And is 6 greater than or equal to negative 7.9? Yeah, 6 is a greater number than a negative number because it's positive, so that would make it true. So 1 would be one of the numbers. Even 2 or 3 or 4, because that would make this 7, 8, 9, would all make that true. So as we move on, you'll see that we're going to be graphing what numbers make this statement true. And at one point, we're also going to be figuring out what numbers is where the limits are for this. So that was just an example. You don't have to write this part down, but I do want you to have everything else written down, including the question that I've got there for you. And so that's an example of how we would write an inequality. So if you want to take a look at this video again, just to make sure that this all makes sense to you, you can. I'm going to leave you here on the on your own part to go ahead and give this a try. I am going to make another last video for this part where I'm going to be explaining